everybody. We're doing Lion Lunch and Learn. Today's guest is Dr. Michael Ormsbee from FSU.
You know,
So, Dr. Ormsbee is a good friend of mine. We're really excited to have him here today to talk about a whole lot. We're going to run through your questions like we practice. So thanks for doing some of the research on that and putting some of your questions and being willing to ask. Dr. Ormsbee is a professor and graduate program director in the Department of Nutrition and Integrated Physiology. He's the director of the Institute of Sports Sciences and Medicine at Florida State University. His research expertise includes exercise training, nutrition, supplemental improvements for metabolism, how to achieve optimal body composition, and human performance. Y'all's list of awards are amazing and extensive. 2004 FSU Teacher of the Year, 2017 Nutrition Researcher of the Year, 2018 FSU Graduate Student Mentor of the Year, 2020 FSU Distinguished Teacher of the Year, the highest award, and 2020 Sports Scientist of the Year. You can also follow him, find out more at Mike Ormsbee, and through Wondrium or the great courses. We've got an amazing course on there called Changing Body Composition Through Diet and Exercise. So let's welcome him. Let's ask some questions.
yeah, thanks, brother. All right, hey, it's a pleasure to be here. I understand we're just going to do rapid fire questions and hopefully turn that into a conversation. But look, packed room for some information on science. I love it. This is fantastic. We're going to just, down the line we go. Okay.
Okay, so my question is, what drew you to actually start studying nutrition and exercise physiology?
Yes, I wanted to be bigger, faster, stronger myself. So I grew up playing all kinds of sports through high school, and then I got into college and focused specifically on ice hockey. So I'm not from Florida. I grew up in New England. So I wanted to be better, and I just started, thinking. I was reading these muscle magazines and training journals and all kinds of stuff to try to be faster, stronger, so I could get more ice time. I just wanted to play more. About that time, I took my first exercise science class, my first year in college, and I didn't know what it was. I just saw exercise, I saw science, two things I kind of liked, and I had a professor there who changed my world. That person opened my eyes and just got me invigorated in science and how to apply techniques of exercise training and nutrition. And so those combinations of being an athlete myself and then taking that one first class in how to apply exercise science really got me started on that path. Does anyone play sports in here? Okay. Or athletic endeavors in some way? Yeah, almost everybody. And I hope even if you don't, that's fine. You probably have some hobby like walking or hiking or something. Those are fascinating ways to get started, and you just see what's missing in your team. You might not have nutrition advice as a student, athlete, or not a lot of it. You might not have training principles other than lift heavier. We just had a 1 rep max conversation, which is fine, but if you train just on 1 rep max, you're going to fail, no doubt about it. There are other ways to train besides strength. You need power, velocity training, and other things that you can throw in there. But for me, I wasn't getting the playing time I wanted in college, so I tried to learn as much as I could and to play a position role. So I got as strong as I possibly could to be a position player at that time. Ultimately, it becomes not about you, though, because I finished college and said, no one cares if I'm bigger, faster, stronger anymore, but I can help other people. And so then I looked at some other interests I had. I had obesity rampant in my family. Anyone have family members who may be overweight or obese, diabetic, any other health or clinical conditions? Yeah. Well, exercise, the slogan we use through the American College of Sports Medicine is exercise is medicine. Exercise is medicine. And if you compare exercise to some of the leading pharmaceutical drugs, it either matches or beats it. So we have the answer to many different things, but we got to be willing to put in the time to make exercise part of your life. So those combinations, my own athletic endeavors, and then eventually becoming more altruistic in my goals. Yeah, good question.
My question is, what science classes did you take in high school?
What's your name?
Aditi.
Aditi. So what science classes did I take in high school?
And in college.
Yeah, so high school, they kind of give you the curriculum, right? You need to take bios and AP bios, and you take we had all types of physics and classes that really got my interest. But I'll tell you, at that time, the thing that interested me most still was PE class and playing my sport. So in high school, just took the regular gamut of classes, and I was always a good student, but I wouldn't say I was only focused in science or only arts. I loved to write. I loved English and history as well. Those were things that fascinated me along the way. And I'll tell you, if you hyper focus now, you're going to burn out at some point. So I would get some breadth to what you're learning and what you're reading. Because one, it helps you be more well-rounded, but you don't want to be the person no one wants to talk to because the only thing you talk about is one thing. Right? If you know a little bit, I would read outside of your primary interest so that you can be the person who can have a conversation with anybody that walks in the room. That will help you with your professors. That'll help you with research subjects if you do end up doing research like we'll talk about today, or just in general, your social lives, being able to talk to all kinds of different people. But my high school science were just the traditional courses that you would get, and not even AP. Y'all are a step ahead already.
And I actually have another question. So, one of my coaches once told me that you need to have protein like immediately after a workout or a practice, but I've like researched it a little bit, and it says you actually have like a 4-hour window to get like the enough protein you need like after a workout or practice.
Yeah,
So
nutrient timing.
do you have anything to say on that?
I sure do. So protein and protein timing has been an area of my lab for 15, 16 years now. In fact, a lot of those protein statements our group contributed to, the protein timing statements through the International Society of Sports Nutrition. So one of the papers that we helped write, which was kind of cool. So the original thought behind it, and it's not wrong, is that you have a window after exercise where you're sort of hypersensitized to take in nutrients. In a context of growing muscle and recovering, people would say eat protein right away. And it got to this place where people were almost scared or stressed if they finished a workout and didn't quickly have the ability to get nutrients in, particularly protein. And so they called it the window of opportunity, when you're just hypersensitized to have an increase in muscle protein synthesis, which would hopefully end up growing the muscle. As more and more work came out, the question wasn't fully asked and the answer wasn't fully there because it was an immediate response. If you took in protein right away, you had a better MPS response. The next question became, when are you training again? When are you training again? So for an athlete, you'll probably train every day or most days. You might even do doubles. So if you have a practice in the morning and you practice again in the afternoon, then that post-exercise protein would be more important because you have another training session. But if you have over 8 hours, and especially if you have 24 hours till you train again, then that window is larger and less important for individuals. So there isn't a 2 or a 4. It is going to be dependent on other factors like what did you eat before exercise. Plays a role too. And here's the bottom line though. If you're going to try to have a recommendation for eating post-exercise, I would say do it. And here's why. It won't hurt you and it might help you. But if you forget it that day and you don't have a protein shake in your bag or whatever, it's okay. You're going to be just fine and you can wait longer to take that in. But personally, when I finish a training plan, my plan is to have a protein bolus after exercise. Even though I know I can have a longer window, there's no need to delay that unless I just forget it. So now it's called the garage door of opportunity, not the window of opportunity, because it's a little bit bigger than we thought.
I heard you played hockey when you were younger. I just want to ask, do you still have a favorite pro hockey team?
Oh, yes. What's your name?
Jackson.
Jackson. Yes. So I grew up in Philadelphia, so my team is the Philadelphia Flyers, and they are not good. And we're hoping they turn that around. But I've always been a fan of them. When I was coming up, we would go to all the games that we could, and I played on some of the teams that were in the Philadelphia area that were like junior Flyers and stuff. So we had lots of interaction with the actual players. So, but this was well before your time. So all my people are the early 2000s, late 90s that I was really following players well.
But you do have the best mascot in all of sports.
People like Gritty. Yeah, if any of you don't know Gritty, Google Gritty and you'll see what this mascot is.
My name is Sydney, and my question is, what jobs do people who take classes for sports sciences typically get after college?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll expand it a little bit. So at FSU, sports sciences is a niche underneath exercise physiology. So you would get a degree in exercise physiology, but you could focus, at least at the graduate program too, on sports sciences, sports nutrition, or straight exercise physiology. And you need to be creative in exercise science. The most streamlined path is to be like me, an academic and a researcher as you go on. We're training people to know how to do research and how to implement research studies. But most people use exercise science to get to a different place. Most of our students at FSU do. They'll use it as their pre-medical training for physical therapy, medical school, PA, chiropractic, you name it. They're coming through our program because we offer all the anatomy and physiologies and all the basic sciences in that track. However, I've seen people get out and do some phenomenal things. For example, I've got a student right now who is the lead of sports performance for the Jaguars. So he came through our program, he did a PhD with me eventually in exercise science, and now he's the head of performance for the Jags. I've got other students that are now professors doing the typical track. I've got some that are head of innovation for sports supplement companies. So they use their knowledge to then become a formulator to make new and innovative products for athletes or general population. And then we have others who come out and they decide to write books and become leaders in your Instagram world. So I have a postdoc now whose name is Joey Munoz. If you look him up on Instagram, his following is like 50,000 people. Another friend of mine is Lane Norton, who has a great podcast and a huge following. It's almost 1 million followers. And so you can use this and be creative, but you really need to understand that it really is an end degree that leads you to other places because the background in sciences is so good and so heavy.
Hi, so my name's Mandy, and I just wanted to ask, how long do your studies usually last, and if you have a favorite study?
That's a good question. So I don't know if you can hear in the back, but how long do our studies usually last? They can vary widely, and it really depends on what the aims of whatever the study is. So right now we have a study that involves 12 weeks of exercise training. And you think, okay, 12 weeks, the study's 12 weeks. But that 12 weeks of exercise training requires 120 individuals to do that training. So that study takes us 5 years. So it's not fast. It takes a long time. And that actually creates some problems when I try to do work with athletes and coaches, because athletes and coaches have a goal of getting their information to the athletes tomorrow. And I'm saying, yeah, but I got to write it up and make a paper out of it. So it's going to be a year from now. And so those goals don't always line up. And so we've had to navigate that a lot because I work with athletics, but I also took a long time to build bridges into FSU athletics to work with them. So most studies range. If it's a training study, you're usually looking at 8 to 12 weeks exercise training. But sometimes we'll give an acute dose of something. We did one study where we looked at a product called teocrine. Anyone ever heard of teocrine? So it's got like caffeine mimetics in it, theocrine, and they call it teocrine, and it's supposed to have like the caffeine properties without the stimulant potential side effects that people are worried about. And that study was one dose. I gave you a dose, I waited till it should peak in your blood, and then I did your performance measures to look if it could work in that fast of a setting. So in those trials, it'd be a bunch of hours, 5-hour study you come in and do, then you take a week off, you come back and use the other product, take a week off, and come back and use a placebo, or in some order like that. So some of them are very fast, and some of them take years and years to complete. My favorite study, I've never been asked that before. Gosh, they're all so exciting. What I like about our work at the Institute of Sports Science and Medicine is our work gets picked up by people outside of science. If you don't have the ability to translate your findings to the general population, nobody cares. Nobody cares. I can do the best study in the world, but if the 3 scientists who know what I'm talking about read it, it doesn't impact anybody, right? So what's cool about our work is we get to have a population, typically it's college students in some of our studies, that is immediately impacted by what we find. Hey, this supplement works in this space, or this helps improve body fat, or you can eat before you go to bed at night and still have an improved metabolism in the morning and still have lipolysis and fat oxidation while you're asleep. People want to know that. So a lot of times it's fun for me when I have a friend, taking a flight, and that little screen that's in front of your face on a flight, one of our studies will pop up, or my great courses thing will come on there, or they'll be flipping through a magazine they picked up and one of our studies is listed there. That's how we get the information out to people. And really that's what's exciting for me, is when we have something that I know will make an impact on athletes or whatever the population is that we're working on. So I kind of copped out of your answer. Do you really need it? Maybe. Probably one of my first studies that I ever did was looking at a population that really needed help. It was probably folks your parents' ages, right? Middle-aged people who were looking to lose some body fat and feel better about themselves and such. And we did a 12-week training study there, and it just changed lives. And as an undergrad, it was my first study out of undergrad. I was a technician for a year after school, and it changed everything. It made me move from not wanting to do research anymore to, holy cow, we can help people here. And that was a fascinating one. So that one was published a long, long time ago, but that got me into it, and that reignited my interest in everything. Yeah. Yeah.
So my question is, what advice would you give to those seeking to major in science and the type of work you put into getting like a postdoc degree?
All right. So advice for those seeking degrees or research in the sciences and getting as far as like even postdocs and such. So that's a good question. So I work a lot with undergraduates. So those of you who are seniors, if you come here, you'll probably have one of my classes at some point. Because I'm the grad program director, I work with masters, PhD students, and then I have right now I have 2 postdocs working with me. Gosh, there's so much in that. I would say the first thing is you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that takes some practice. Those of you who don't want to ask questions today because it's a little uncomfortable, like, that's okay. But you got to get to a place that you can force yourself to do it. You need to be willing to put in the effort that other people aren't. How many books are you willing to read to get to the next level? How many papers are you willing to do? How much time are you willing to invest in yourself so that you have a big payoff 5 or 10 years later? It's the long game in academics because you're playing years out. Every degree takes forever. 4 years for bachelor's, 2 years for master's, another 4 or so for a PhD, another 2 to 4 for a postdoc. I mean, you're looking a long time if you're staying in that type of a realm. So get comfortable being uncomfortable, asking the questions, putting yourself in scenarios that are a little bit uncomfortable. I tell you what, a lot of students at FSU are afraid to come talk to faculty, but you have to come speak to us, or I don't know who you are. So that alone will set you apart from folks. Go to office hours. I literally sit there every week and wait for people to come in, and nobody comes in, or one person. You know who comes in? The very best student. And then the very worst student comes in the last week of class. And that's all I see. So get yourself in a scenario where you're comfortable talking and asking those questions. The second thing I think would be get super focused. I see so many students who are just unfocused, and they're blaming it on everything else other than themselves. Focus. What do you want? How are you going to get there? If you saw me or Mr. Madden or somebody on the street and you knew the work that we did, would you come up and ask for a selfie? Or would you come up and ask us how we got where we are? The choice you make in that question could dictate the rest of your life. Because the best thing to do is maybe both. How'd you get where you are? And then at the end of that, take your selfie. But don't just take the selfie and walk away. How did you get where you are? Ask those types of questions. So get super focused. You need to, everyone drives in here, I suppose. Everyone has a phone, probably. How many of you text while you drive? How many of you have texted at some point while you're driving? Good for those of you who are not raising your hands, I don't believe you. 1/10 of a second, lose distraction, you're going to crash. It's so terrifying, especially to drive around here. You see people running red lights everywhere. It's terrifying. But that amount of focus is the difference between staying on the road and having a problem. And it's the split decision. It's a focus to be hyper directed towards an end. Now, you might not know what end game you want to be, but focus, do your work. So hyper focus. The last thing I think in that case is, I always say this, but 2 little letters sort of dictate a lot of how I view passion towards a subject. 2 letters only. So I'll ask you this. Are you in high school? Are you into high school? Let's make it another way. Are you in Mr. Madden's class? Or are you into Mr. Madden's class? You see the difference? It makes all the difference in the world. If you're in the class, you're just here. You're present. If you're into the class or into the topic or whatever the subject matter is, now you're invested. You're contributing. That makes all the difference. So I would approach everything you do as being into it. Are you into this? Or are you just in the class? There'll be some things, certainly, you got to check the box and get through something. But when in doubt, take your 1 second and think, am I in this or am I into this? And that'll make you a leader or a follower. And you'll finish in the order that you chose to be. So focus, be into your subject matter. And I would also get direction. Get a mentor. Find someone who has a job you want, is a few years ahead of you, and what you want to be doing is doing it well, and learn from them. What are they doing? What are they doing well? How do they navigate certain situations? Nobody does this alone. I'll tell you, even as someone who's been in this field forever, I've got mentors that I call every day, every week, every month, at every level. My undergraduate major professor, my master's degree major professor, my PhD major professor. I talk to every one of them at least once a month, and some of them weekly. So get a mentor and follow that path. They have it written for you, right? You don't have to navigate it alone, but you do need some direction. So here's one other little exercise like that. Everybody close your eyes for a second. Close your eyes. Now take your hand, don't hit any cameras here, but take your hand and point north. Point north. Keep your hands up where they're going. Open your eyes. Now look where everyone's pointing. We're all over the place. We're all over the place. We're all over. Mr. Madden's correct. North is that way. Now listen, how much easier would that be with a compass? How much easier would that be? You need some direction, and that's what a compass will do. That's what a mentor will do. That's what a more senior person would do. So I would take those steps along the way. Will help you tremendously.
My name's Brandon. My question was just, what are all the different sports teams that you'll participate with in your studies or have in your studies?
Sure. So sports teams and our studies, and I'll just go specifically here at FSU. So I've been at FSU for almost 13 years now. And so we've had a lot of different changes in coaching staff, and that's strength coaching staff, sports nutrition staff, sports medicine staff, as well as the team coaches. It took us a long time to get involved with athletics because there are certainly territorial things about someone like me with a research angle coming in, and a strength and conditioning background in sports nutrition coming in to talk to those individuals who do a totally different job. And so it took talking and communicating. By the way, communication is, I don't care what you do. If you cannot communicate, you will not be successful. You have got to be able to communicate. So we finally had relationships in place where the head of strength and conditioning for Olympic sports, her name's Elisa Angelis, she's fabulous. She and I were working together, and then she's my in. All right, and so she helped me grow that. It's the network that really built that out. So what we've worked primarily with to date are the female sports on campus, which is awesome because there's a huge need for more female scientists in sports science. We need more women, and we need more studies on women. We've had a focus here for 4 or 5 years now where we look almost exclusively at women in our studies with athletes. So here's some cool ones. Anyone heard about sleeping in a certain temperature might make you sleep better? Anyone ever heard that? Yeah, it's usually cooler than you think. And so right before the soccer national championships last year, where the FSU team won, Elisa and I got together and we said, let's call a company that makes these mattress toppers that cool the bed down. So in some situations, students are in dorms or in situations where you can't just crank the AC down because you bother other people, it's expensive, blah, blah. So if you put it on your bed, then you could control the temperature for you alone, and that's nice. And so what we did is we got all these we use a company called Chili Sleep, We put all these chili pads on everybody's bed, and we had them do it without the pad and with the pad, and then we measured performance the next day against a top 20 team. And when we did that, we found out that when they slept at their own temperature, their personal preference for temperature, so that range, some people actually liked it warmer and not cooler, but when they set their own personal preference for temperature, they had a better sleep latency, meaning they fell asleep faster, more hours in bed, they were just more comfortable, more hours of sleep in bed, which was also a win, and we saw improvements in recovery as measured with a Whoop band. Whoop band's like a tracker that you can use. So that was a cool study last year with the women, the female soccer team. Now, I'll tell you what was also really cool is when COVID hit, we all shut down just like y'all did. And what we had to do was say, well, we can't really work with athletes in the lab anymore. So we went to Whoop and we wrote a grant from them, and they sponsored 500 watches, wristbands, to be put on 500 female athletes at 4 different universities. So we took the lead, and my lab led this. It was me for FSU and Elisa. And then we had South Dakota State. That's where I did my master's. We had Nebraska. That's where one of my students was head of performance. And then we had UNC Chapel Hill. And there is a researcher there named Abby Smith Ryan who does fabulous work, does a lot of work with females specifically. So anybody, but particularly women are interested, like that is a fantastic lab. And so all 4 of us had the watches on everybody, and then Whoop was collecting data because it's an app. So it's like, what'd you eat, da da da. And then we also took a lot of data on menstrual cycle. And menstrual cycle is something people don't ever talk about for whatever reason, but it could be critical to understanding a lot about female athletes. And so we did a lot of data collection through Whoop, where we get to look at those data and figure out what's going on with what are they eating before bed, how does it impact performance, how does it impact recovery. And when we took a quick look at it, the women in that study, again, lots of women, guess how many, maybe this is out of context, but guess how many grams of protein they had before going to bed at night? Anybody ever, you might, it's kind of out of context. What's a random guess? 15, 10? Oh, you guys are actually really good. So they were at 7. 7 grams of protein was their pre-sleep snack. Guess how many you're supposed to have according to our data? 40. 40 for optimal recovery, muscle protein synthesis, muscle growth. And it does not impact fat metabolism at all. No impact at all. And it might increase overall metabolic rate while you're sleeping. So we found out some cool things like that. And we're now, so that was a lot with soccer and different women's teams across the country in those studies. Right now we're going back to it and we're looking at whatever we can from data that's collected in the female athletes specifically. We just had interest from men's tennis. We've got a new connection through football now that we might be able to explore some things. But so far our relationship has been really good with the women's sports teams on campus.
All right, so my name is Ethan, and you kind of already tapped into my question already. So I had one that I was thinking about myself, and it was when you were talking about the different supplements and different things that people would take to increase focus over long periods of time. What is the balance between taking a supplement like caffeine or taking certain chemicals and sleep time, and how does that affect focus?
Yeah, so if you're going to choose anything, I would choose sleep before you go to supplements of any sort. A lot of times I'll get emails from random, usually it's football players, that say, I want to get bigger or I have a game next week, what can I do? And I'm like, no. Like, what are you eating? How much do you eat? How much do you sleep? So the bigger ticket items are not supplements. Now they will make a difference, but I would handle a lot of the other things before I go down that rabbit hole. Now you asked about caffeine. Caffeine certainly can improve focus. There's tons of data on it, and it improves performance too. I mean, there's a lot of data showing almost every sport has an improvement in performance in some way from a caffeine dose that's as low as 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. Right, so that conversion hopefully you guys are into or know, right, with the 2.2. So if you can divide your body weight in pounds out, you can get to kilos and then multiply that by 3. That's the low dose of what you would want. So it tends to be between 250 and 350 milligrams which is what you would get in like a Starbucks coffee at a minimum, because the doses. There's one study that looked at I think it was 12 different visits to Starbucks with the same size drink. They measured caffeine in it, and it ranged from 200 to 600 in the same drink. So it's how it's brewed, who puts it in there, how much beans they pack in. It could be brewed completely differently. So you might go one time and say, man, that didn't do anything. I must be super sleepy. Or you go like, holy cow. Well, that might not be just you responding to it. It could be a different dose in that drink. Now for focus and sleep and stuff, typically you would say you would want to have your last caffeine dose at least 6 hours before you're trying to go to bed, at least. All right. Otherwise you will impact sleep and that sleep latency bit, the falling asleep and then wake episodes. How many times are you waking up? Even if you don't perceive it, you might have more wake episodes while you're asleep, which is disruptive to getting into deep sleep. So if you're going to have caffeine, I would front load it morning, and I would have a stop time it's variable, but at least 6 hours before trying to go to bed. And it'll change with age, it'll change with activity level, it'll change with what you ate it with. If you have a huge carbohydrate load with your caffeine, it won't raise your blood concentrations as high. If you're more overweight or obese, it changes how much your peak caffeine will go. So there are variables that play a role, but in general, you're looking at 3 to 6 milligrams per kilo for a performance benefit, and stop drinking it or eating it in any sort at least 6 hours before bed. Good question.
Hey, what is your go-to pre-workout meal? And what's the difference between like if you're going on a long run or a long bike ride versus going to the gym and doing like strength training?
Yeah.
And what you should eat before that?
Yeah, good question. So it's about pre-workout meal. Gosh, it really does change based on what you're going to go do and personal tolerance. I learned the hard way in ice hockey where I thought I could hammer like a whole spaghetti meal and go play less than an hour later. And I was vomiting noodles on the ice. It was disgusting. So for me, it's like before a hard effort where I knew it would be repeat high intensity things, it was at least 3 hours before I would eat a bigger meal of that size. You're talking 600 to 800 calories and something like that. But that's not typically the recommendation anymore. I would say, depending on what you're doing, if it's going to go lift, I would just make sure you're sort of fueled up. I would have probably a banana. I'd probably have some type of protein in there as well, just to make sure you have some protein going into the workout. And then you can take care of the rest of it post-workout. But I'll tell you, working in this field for a very long time, I don't know how your stomach handles things, or if you get nervous even going to the gym to perform something, or if you're going to go practice. So it's so much of that's personal preference, but I wouldn't do it fasted. And I'll tell you this, fasted cardio, and fasted cardio is pretty popular, does not burn more fat throughout a day or over time. Eat before you do it. All right, one of the studies from Chapel Hill I mentioned earlier looked in women specifically, and we're giving a protein shake before exercise or not. A small dose, like 150 calories of protein. And when they had the protein bolus before the morning exercise, and it was cardio in this case, they actually had an improved metabolism all day long and ended up burning more calories overall throughout the day than they did when they did that fasted. So I wouldn't do it fasted unless it's just like you're going at 5 in the morning and you don't want to wake up at 3 o'clock. So you roll over and go. There are some very high level strategies to purposefully do fasted cardio, but it would be a different mechanism. Like long endurance trained athletes do this technique called sleep low, where they'll purposely have no carbohydrates in the evening, all night long. They'll exercise at a very low pace. This isn't for high intensity. It's slow exercise, long exercise, like a long, slow run, long, slow bike ride or something, or swimming maybe, where you try to push yourself to metabolically shift to being able to use more fats as a fuel. So you can actually upregulate mitochondrial biogenesis and some of the enzymes involved in fat metabolism using that strategy. But it's usually only used about once a week. And I would say that overall it's fuel for the level of intensity. If you're going hard, you're going to need carbohydrates and you're going to need fuel. If you're going super low and it's a recovery day, pull down the calorie load, pull down that carbohydrate load. But always lock protein constant. Make all your meals around that. And that should be about 1.6 to as high as 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you do it in pounds, it's roughly 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds, you would want to eat 150 grams of protein. And that's the high end. You don't need quite that much. It won't hurt you. And typically people fall just short and you'll hit right on what you need, which is that 1.6-ish area.
Hi, I'm Davis. My question is, what balance of diet and working out do you think is important in comparison to genetic and physical makeup?
I'll tell you a cool story. There's a researcher down at Nova Southeastern named Jose Antonio, and he looked at the fat gene. There's a gene that is supposed to contribute us to be obese. And he took a whole slew of genetic testing on a whole lot of people, including one professional fighter named Chris Algieri. Chris Algieri has won the world title in welterweight boxing, kickboxing as well, like 2 different world titles. Guess what his genes say he should be? Obese. So despite having the gene that is supposed to lead to him being obese, it didn't do that in him. So while there is a huge genetic background to everything, you don't have to be a victim to it. And you can really work well with exercise and nutrition to guide your performance, to guide your body composition, to guide your mental clarity in a way that it won't outdo all of that, but it can fight against it and it can even overcome it in some scenarios like the one I'm talking about. So performance is required, healthy eating and nutrition are required, but don't always think about it for performance. Like I've got, Mr. Madden's got a little kid, 2 little kids, we've got 2 little kids. I don't ever speak about it in a way that's just about body composition. It's all about, it makes me feel good. When they see me working out, why are you doing that? I do this because it makes me feel good. And you drive all of it sort of that direction. I think that's the key to really getting lifelong success out of exercise and nutrition that will overcome some of these genetic problems. Not always, but you can certainly fight against it.
I'm Lydia. So how can one alter their diet, nutrition intake that would improve their individual athletics and sport and or their personal build?
Yeah. So there's a course that I think will take a long time to do. That's a whole loaded question that could take a lifetime to figure out. But I'll tell you the biggest mistakes I see and then what the biggest bang for your buck is in terms of fixes and changes to make. One is not starting because you're afraid. And it's kind of like the whole thing. You won't leave your driveway. If you don't leave your driveway till every light's green, you'll never leave, right? Because it's always going to be mistimed. It's the same way with changing body composition. Change one thing at a time. Like if you were to come in and we were training and maybe you can lift a ton, but let's do a scenario where you can't. And I'd say, hey, can you deadlift 350 right now for me? I can do it. Why can't you do it? It's like coming in and saying, hey, I eat this way. Eat this way. You can't. It's not how it's set up. So it's small changes adding up over time is definitely the way to go. Where I say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that you can increase your protein intake? And if you give me anything other than a 9 or a 10, we don't even do it. We go to some other skill or task that's not as long, not as taxing. So small changes over time. With my diet, I focus everything on protein and build the plate around it with carbohydrates and fats. And I ebb and flow that based on intensity.
All right, well, hey, y'all.
Saved by the bell.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks so much, Dr. Ormsbee. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys. These are both 5 pounds of fat, 5 pounds of weight. Look how much different in size. They both weigh 5 pounds.